Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Starr here with you. We are going to be looking at the Byzantine Empire today. And I think you probably just watched a little introduction to the Byzantine Empire. So this shouldn't be brand new, but we'll get to a little bit of the importance of this empire in the East. When we look at the icon statements, we're talking about the importance of Byzantium, that's this territory, especially when we look at trade. And then we'll be getting into the differences between the two versions of Christianity that we see, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Greek Orthodox. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at our activity today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to start with a little prompt. I want you right now to think about someone you currently look up to, or you looked up to maybe when you were younger. All right, you don't necessarily have to write their name down like it says, but just think about them right now in your head. And what I want you to think about is, why did you look up to them? Right? Why were they cool to you, or why did you think they were great? And I want you then to put now that idea onto this map that we see of the Roman Empire. We had just talked about back in Unit 3 about the Roman Empire, and they controlled all this territory, whether it was pink or orange. And when we look at it, the orange side of this becomes what we know as the Eastern Roman Empire. And you can see at the very center of the Eastern Roman Empire, south of the Black Sea, was Constantinople. And that becomes the kind of secondary capital of the Roman Empire. Now, when the Western Roman Empire falls, who is kind of like the older brother here, or the person that you might look up to, the Eastern Roman Empire kind of wants to be like them. They kind of continue to follow in their footsteps. And so Constantinople and what we eventually will know as Byzantium, all the orange territory there, continue on after the Western Roman Empire falls. And so they're kind of like the person that looked up to the Western Roman Empire. They wanted to be more like them. But there's a lot of differences too when we look at those two portions of the empire. So let's go closer and find out more about Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. Your activity looks like this. You've got a number of topics on the left-hand side there. And as you go through, you're going to read each section of this tour guide that we have given you. It's the articles basically that you have to download to go with it. And you're going to come up with, in the important summarizing section, 4 bullet points or 4 facts that are important for the topic. So we'll look at Istanbul and Justinian I, one of the emperors, Theodora, his queen, and so on and so forth. And you're going to read through the tour guide section for each of those areas, and you're going to jot down 4 kind of summarizing important fact bullet points for each of them. All right. Now, before we get to each section that you'll be doing some reading about in the tour guide, I'll give you a little introduction to that area. All right. You can then pause this video, read through what you've got, and then we can go on to the next section as well together then. All right. So here's what your page looks like. You also then have the tour guide that the cover kind of looks like this on. And it's got a bunch of articles underneath it, or sections. And each one of those sections will correspond to one of the slides that I kind of introduced to you right now. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into this. The first one we have is Istanbul. The city of Constantinople is now known as Istanbul, but it used to be called Constantinople. So I'm going to give you a little introduction to the city and this picture right here, and then you can go ahead and read that section of the tour guide and find out your facts and information. All right. The Byzantine Empire grew out of the fading Roman Empire. In the 4th century CE, the western half of the Roman Empire had been weakened by barbarian invasions. At the same time, Christianity was a growing force, and Constantine the Great became the first Christian emperor of Rome. Because the eastern portion of the empire had a longer tradition of absolutism and monotheism than the West did, Constantine decided to consolidate his rule by moving the capital east in the year 330 CE. He chose the Greek seaport of Byzantium and renamed it New Rome, but it eventually became known as his city, Constantinople. This magnificent city of the Eastern Roman Empire became the hub of the Byzantine Empire. All right, so you may go ahead and pause the video right here, guys. I want you to go on to this section right here of the tour guide book, page 1. Read through that section, and you can go ahead and give me 4 important facts. Write those down about the city of Constantinople. All right, so go ahead and pause right now, and we'll continue on in a minute. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back here. Hopefully you got all the facts you needed there about the city of Constantinople. There's all kinds of great things about how it's a Christian city, how the Roman customs and classical Greek culture kind of all survived there. There's some Roman legal traditions there. And so make sure you found your 4 important facts. Moving on, though, to the next portion of our tour, we're looking at the mosaic of Justinian I. So I'll give you your introduction, and then again, you can pause and read your article in the tour guide. The Byzantine Empire's 16th and most ambitious ruler was Emperor Justinian I, who held power from 527 until his death in 565 CE. Justinian ascended the throne at the age of 45. He was very devout, determined, and even stubborn. Rather than allow problems to develop, he took steps to prevent them. He preferred to invade rather than be invaded. During Justinian's reign, a historian named Procopius praised the emperor as even-tempered and hard-working. After Justinian's death, though, Procopius wrote in his book, A Secret History, that the emperor had been devious, false, hypocritical, two-faced, cruel, skilled in dissembling his thought, and never moved to tears by either joy or pain. A liar always. All right, so that was Procopius's quote about the actual emperor himself. Find out about Justinian right now. You can go ahead and read the tour guide right here, read through it, jot down your 4 important facts about perhaps the greatest of all of the emperors of the Constantinople city and Byzantine Empire. You may pause right here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you found out a little bit more information about Justinian and who he actually was. He did do a lot of amazing things for Constantinople and for the Byzantine Empire. So hopefully you found some of that information. Moving on to our next stop on our tour here, we see the mosaic. It's actually in the same place as the last mosaic we looked at. This is the mosaic of Theodora. Theodora is the wife of Justinian. And so let's talk a little bit about it. I'll give you your introduction. Justinian's wife, the Empress Theodora, was a remarkable and influential woman who equaled and sometimes surpassed her husband in political skill and wisdom. Born into the lower classes, her father was a bear keeper for the Constantinople circus. Theodora carved out a teenage career as a dancer and actress. She loved adventure, new friendships, and travel. In her 20s, though, and back from a long trip to Africa, she settled down and married Justinian. Once he took power, Theodora was active in politics, advancing her friends, destroying her enemies, and sometimes giving orders that canceled out her husband Justinian's orders. She also was responsible for several social welfare programs, including one for the city's poor and homeless girls, and for convincing the emperor to expand women's rights. So, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and read through the tour guide section about Theodora, and let's find out 4 important facts about Theodora with the tour guide book. You can pause right now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you found out some information about Theodora, specifically the way she handled her husband in some cases, especially when we talk about something they had, the Nika revolt, the way she handled that. We're moving on to look at another tour stop here. We have the Hagia Sophia. And so I'll give you a little introduction, and then you can go ahead and read a little bit more about the Hagia Sophia in our tour guide book. In the wake of the riot, the Nika revolt in 532, Justinian undertook to rebuild and restore the city of Constantinople. True to form, he did it on a grand scale. In addition to the many civic buildings Justinian had built, the crown jewel of Constantinople was now the largest of its 25 new Christian cathedrals, a domed church named the Hagia Sophia, which you can see a picture of right here. So you can go ahead and pause right now, ladies and gentlemen, and you can read through page 4 of your tour guide book. And let's find out 4 more facts about the Hagia Sophia. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back after the Hagia Sophia. Hopefully you found out some information about it. The fact that it was a church, and then it was a mosque, and then it was a museum, and now actually, it doesn't say it in there, but it's being turned back into a mosque again. So lots of different cultural things going on with the Hagia Sophia. We're going to slide into our next stop here on our tour, and that is the icon of Mary and Jesus. I'll give you a little information, a little intro to the icons here and the use of icons, and then I'm going to have you do something a little bit different before we go through it here. All right. It says, throughout the Byzantine Empire, the Christian church carried forward a long tradition of icons. An icon is a representation of sacred persons or events, such as the lives of Jesus and the saints. Icons appear in several forms: in mural paintings, mosaics, and most typically painted on small wooden panels. These flat, two-dimensional religious images can be venerated in special ways, and specific technical rules guide their artistic form. Some Byzantine Christians opposed icons because they felt it was wrong to show devotion to a mere man-made image. They feared that the icons were being worshipped as though they represented gods. Those opposed to icons argued that worship should be offered only to God. For a long time, these Christians were in the minority, and icons were widely accepted. Those who supported the use of icons argued that the images helped the faithful honor the religious figures represented. Portraits of Jesus, his mother Mary, and other saints became increasingly popular. Indeed, some of the newest Christian converts, barbarians in the West, accepted icons with a vengeance, investing with them magical powers and making sacrifices before these images. So instead of reading through this entire section, what I want you to do here is just kind of read that first paragraph. It talks about the idea of anti-icon Christians known as iconoclasts. So read a little bit of that. And I want you to write down this chart that I have right on the screen for you right now. It says the split in the Roman Catholic Church. And so we've got the idea of the Roman Catholic Church, the part from the Western Roman Empire, and the difference between that church and the church that develops here in the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. Both of them are Christian, but they had major differences between the two of them. And this is where we see a split from the Catholic Church, where we get now the Catholic versus the Eastern Orthodox Church. All right, so write that down. We'll find out a little bit more about that later on too. But write down, create this little chart right in your area, and I want you to write that information in your chart instead. All right, when you're done with that, we can go ahead and go on. So pause here if you need to. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back here with the very last section of our tour today, and that's looking at the trade routes and trade in general here when we look at Constantinople. You can kind of see in this map that all trade routes actually sort of lead to one spot on that map, and that is the city of Constantinople. So it was extremely strategically important. I'm going to give you a little introduction, and you can read your last page of our tour guide today. The Byzantine Empire was a vast array of cultural and commercial threads, tied together by the great knot of Constantinople. The inhabitants of the empire were descended from many ancient peoples, including the Armenians, Slavs, Bulgarians, Greeks, Normans, and Turks. Most of them were farmers who lived in one-room huts made of wood or mud bricks. They raised grapes, olives, and wheat, or herded sheep and lived on cheese, bread, and vegetables cooked in olive oil. Constantinople, however, which became known as simply the city due to its magnificent edifices, large population, and commercial success, was home to the wealthy and powerful, who lived in stone mansions, feasted on meat cooked in garlic sauces, and enjoyed fine wines. I want you to read through the tour guide here and find out a little bit more information about these trade routes and why trade was so important to the city of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. So, ladies and gentlemen, now that you've gone through the entire tour, let's take a look at your kind of conclusion here. You do have a question to answer at the very bottom, and the question is, why do you think Constantinople was called the Crossroads? All right, I want you to do a well-written paragraph that kind of sums everything up. After reading everything about the city itself and the trade and Justinian and Theodora and everything that went along with it, I want you to answer that question. Why is it the Crossroads? All right, good luck, and we will see you again soon.